Have you ever witnessed someone entering a place as if they owned the world, as if everyone around them existed only to satisfy their ego? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Today's story begins exactly like that, with a billionaire walking through the doors of a luxury hotel as if descending from an invisible throne, surrounded by astonished glances, discreet murmurs, and an arrogance so intense it seemed to fill the air. He didn't walk, he glided with the confidence of someone who believes that money is a passport to respect, admiration, and absolute power. And perhaps you've seen someone like that in your life. Someone who believes they can step on others without ever facing consequences. Have you ever experienced this? Right from the entrance, the discomfort of the employees was palpable. Each of his steps echoed through the marble lobby like a silent threat. No one there could make a mistake. No one could slow down. No one could get in the way of his precious path. The billionaire, enveloped in expensive cologne and a cold gaze, observed everything impatiently, as if the mere fact of having to wait a few seconds for service was a personal offense. He slammed his card on the counter with unnecessary force, as if to make it clear that he was used to having open doors, clear paths, and people bowing at the slightest sign of his presence. The way he analyzed the faces around him made it evident that he saw employees as disposable parts, replaceable cogs in a mechanism created solely to serve him. The hotel, one of the most luxurious in the city, seemed to tremble under his authoritarian demeanor. The receptionists exchanged nervous glances, the security guards watched from a distance, and even the guests felt the change in the atmosphere when he passed by. His arrogance was not discreet. It was like a perfume that was too strong, impossible to ignore. He spoke loudly, demanded immediate attention, and showed irritation at any detail that wasn't exactly as he wanted it. He was the type of person accustomed to being flattered, praised, treated as an almost untouchable figure. For him, humility was a non-existent word. But there was something different that morning, something he didn't notice, or perhaps ignored out of sheer disdain. Among the employees who looked away, afraid of his volatile temper, there was someone who observed him with quiet calm. A black woman, dressed in the simple uniform of a cleaning lady, pushing a cleaning cart, seemed to be the only one not intimidated by his presence. While the billionaire complained, sighed, and gestured impatiently, she continued her work, focused, professional, showing no discomfort. He, however, didn't even see her. In his mind, people like her were invisible, and that's precisely where everything begins to change. Because this story, this true, painful, and deeply revealing story, isn't just about arrogance. It's about how fate sometimes takes unexpected turns. It's about poetic justice, reverse humiliation, and that lesson that arrives when you least expect it. And if you've ever felt the weight of being underestimated, humiliated, or treated as less than you are, perhaps this story speaks directly to you. What the billionaire didn't yet know was that this seemingly ordinary encounter on that ordinary morning would be the turning point that would forever change how he saw the world, and especially people. And it is precisely at this moment, this instant when he believes he controls everything around him, that something begins to move, silently, outside his field of vision, and this is where our story truly begins. And while that billionaire continued to cast disdainful glances, completely blind to anything that didn't align with his own ego, perhaps you too are remembering a moment in your life when you were treated as invisible, ignored, or belittled by someone who considered themselves superior. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far, because when you share your experience, other people going through similar situations find strength, support, and even hope. And that makes all the difference. And since we're walking this path together through a story so full of emotion and poetic justice, take the opportunity to leave a like, not only because it helps the video, but because it shows that this type of content resonates with you. Believe me, each like pushes this message to more people who need to hear something like this today. And if you feel that these stories speak to you, that they somehow touch you, make you reflect, or remind you of your own journey, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people with human, genuine, and purposeful content. And while all this was happening, him complaining, demanding, treating everyone like disposable parts, the woman who discreetly cleaned the hallway remained there, steadfast, silent, almost invisible to his eyes, but about to become the key to a twist he could never have imagined. Because in that enormous lobby, illuminated by expensive chandeliers and hurried footsteps, a story was unfolding without him realizing it, a story that would turn everything upside down right before his eyes. The activity in that lobby remained intense, but there was something almost symbolic in the contrast between the excessive brightness of the environment and the silent presence of that black woman who carried out her routine with dedication. She pushed the cleaning cart with calm, meticulous movements, like someone who had learned to place dignity even in tasks that the world insists on calling simple. There was care in every gesture, a kind of serene presence that escaped the rush and arrogance around her. But for the billionaire, none of that had value. He was so immersed in his own superiority that he didn't even consider the possibility that other people might have stories, journeys, battles, and hidden truths that he was completely unaware of. The first confrontation happened almost like a twist of fate. She was bent over, wiping up a small amount of excess water near the reception desk, when he came walking in without looking where he was going, as if the ground were obliged to make way for him. Seeing her there, the billionaire frowned as if faced with an irritating obstacle. "Can't you do that at another time?" he snapped, without even waiting for a reply. The way he spoke carried such deep contempt that it cut through the air. She stood up slowly, maintaining her composure, without showing the slightest intention of confrontation. She simply replied, with an almost disconcerting politeness, that was precisely the time designated for cleaning. But he didn't listen, or rather, he didn't want to listen. It was as if her existence was an inconvenient detail within his egocentric universe. Some nearby employees exchanged tense glances, realizing that something was going too far. But the billionaire continued, as if determined to make it clear that her presence there deeply bothered him. "Get out of the way," he ordered, gesturing sharply for her to move aside. It was evident that he spoke as someone accustomed to seeing people give in even before he asks. The woman took a step aside, keeping her gaze down, not out of submission, but to avoid any unnecessary confrontation. Those who observed closely could perceive the silent strength within her, a strength built on difficult journeys, complex decisions, and a mindset the billionaire could never have imagined. The humiliation continued even more cruelly when he accidentally dropped a piece of paper from his pocket and, instead of simply ignoring it or picking it up, looked at her as if it were her obligation to deal with it immediately. "This is on the floor. Isn't that your job?" he said, with a crooked smile laden with sarcasm. The tension around them was palpable, as if everyone had stopped for a second just to witness the scene. The woman took a deep breath, bent down, and picked up the paper, not out of submission, but because her job demanded order, care, and discipline. Even so, it was impossible not to feel the weight of the growing indignation among those around her. Someone whispered that he had overreacted. Another shook their head in disapproval, but no one dared to intervene, and it is precisely in these kinds of moments that life tends to plant seeds of profound revelations. The woman, silent, continued her work, but there was something different now, a greater firmness in her eyes, a quiet certainty that the truth would still have its moment, because despite his arrogance, she knew who she really was. She knew the impact she had. She knew the responsibility she carried. She knew the inner workings of that luxury building in a way he would never suspect. And this inner security created a powerful, Contrast with the billionaire's impatient and explosive behavior, who seemed increasingly irritated, the calmer she remained. Perhaps, deep down, it was precisely this serenity that bothered him. People accustomed to absolute control tend to despair when they realize that their behavior doesn't affect others as they expected. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because each of his gestures revealed more about his own fragility than about any supposed superiority. When someone needs to humiliate others to feel great, what is truly lacking within that person? This question resonates not only in the story but in real life, because we have all encountered someone like that, someone who hides behind a title, a position, a status, trying to mask overflowing insecurities. And that is precisely why scenes like this evoke so much outrage and, at the same time, so much empathy. Outrage at the obvious injustice, empathy for the silent strength of those who remain standing even when the world tries to push them down. The truth is that every offensive word he hurled at her said more about him than about her. The woman knew this. She knew that the way someone treats those who can offer them nothing in return reveals character, reveals principles, reveals the person's deepest essence. And while she continued her work with dignity, the billionaire became increasingly lost in his own arrogance, without imagining that this same woman, the one he humiliated as if she were insignificant, held a revelation capable of turning everything upside down. And before we move on, leave a simple sentence in the comments so I know you're experiencing this journey with me. This makes sense to me. There was something almost intriguing about the way the woman remained silent, as if that succession of humiliations had no power to scratch the surface of her inner peace, while the billionaire poured out his contempt with the arrogance typical of someone who has never needed to measure their words. She simply observed. It wasn't the look of someone who accepts injustice. It was the look of someone who understands much more than they show, a look that carried history, preparation, and a deep awareness of her own worth. And perhaps that was precisely what bothered the billionaire most, his inability to destabilize her. She moved through the lobby with ease, knowing every inch of the place as if she had participated in its construction. The employees, always standing, upright before the guests, softened their expressions as she passed. It was a mixture of respect and familiarity that the billionaire, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy being the center of his own universe to realize that someone there inspired more reverence than he could ever buy with money. A security guard bowed discreetly to greet her. A receptionist offered a genuine smile, the kind you don't give to just anyone. And the manager, a man who rarely showed emotion, adjusted his tie as she passed by, as if straightening his posture in the presence of someone important. The billionaire saw all of this, but interpreted nothing. His arrogant mindset filtered the world in a predictable way. To him, she was just a cleaning lady, an invisible piece. A figure who, in his distorted view, should be grateful for the chance to serve someone like him. What he could never imagine was that those small gestures carried profound revelations, almost glaring to those with sensitivity, but completely hidden from eyes that only see status and appearance. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue back, didn't confront. She simply continued performing her function with precision, like someone who makes conscious decisions about where to put her energy. One detail, however, began to catch his attention, or at least it would have if he had the skill to observe. Her name tag was different from the other employees. It wasn't colorful, it didn't have the usual stripe. It was discreetly silver, with a small, elegant coat of arms, almost imperceptible to someone who didn't know what to look for. It was the kind of detail that revealed authority to anyone who understood the inner workings of managing a large enterprise. But, for the billionaire, it was just an unimportant accessory. The hidden truth was there, shining silently on the chest of the woman he was trying to diminish. And it was precisely this tranquility of hers that began to create an atmosphere of mystery. Because no one, Absolutely no one remains so serene in the face of so much provocation unless they have something greater stored in their pocket or in their soul. It was as if she knew every flaw in his words, every exaggeration of ego, every attempt to assert power, and yet she remained above it all, observing with a clarity that few possess, as if she foresaw exactly where that journey was about to lead. Small signs escaped, the way she perceived the employees' movements even before they spoke, the way she discreetly adjusted an item on the reception desk, correcting a detail that even the manager hadn't noticed, or the way she answered an internal call on the radio with the confidence of someone in charge, not someone obeying. The billionaire, oblivious to everything, continued his arrogant performance, convinced he was in control. But the truth is, in that luxurious setting, only one person truly understood the inner workings of the hotel, and it wasn't him. There was something almost poetic in this contrast. He carried astronomical sums in his bank account, but she carried knowledge. He had money, she had impact. He shouted, she thought. He acted impulsively, she observed with calculated calm. Her actions weren't those of someone being belittled, but rather of someone who had seen this kind of scene so many times that she had learned to recognize patterns. And above all, she had learned to wait. Every detail contributed to fueling a growing mystery. Who was this woman who remained so firm, so centered, so above the arrogance of others? Why did she seem to know the inner workings of that place so well? And why did so many employees treat her with almost reverent respect? It was as if there was an invisible layer of authority around her, a layer he hadn't yet noticed, but which was about to turn the whole game around in a way he could never have imagined. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because her silence wasn't just silence. It was strategy. It was experience. It was power. It was the presence of someone who, even wearing a simple uniform, carried a history of personal and professional transformation that could never be measured solely by the work visible to the eye. A woman who knew every cog in that hotel, every person, every decision, every situation that passed through the discreet corridors and administrative rooms where the real commands were made. She was someone who observed the billionaire with the patience of someone who already knew exactly where that arrogance would end, not by guessing, but because she knew deeply the kind of man he represented. And while he remained trapped by his own vanity, she remained in silent control of the situation, awaiting the right moment when the truth would reveal itself with the exact weight he needed to feel. A weight that would come not as revenge, but as a natural consequence of the choices and mentality of each one there. A revelation that would completely change the course of history, and that was being built before everyone's eyes, piece by piece, gesture by gesture, without him realizing how much he was digging his own grave. Before we continue, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." When the billionaire received notice that he should go to the main meeting room to discuss an important contract, he didn't hesitate. He found it natural. In his mind, it was obvious that any relevant decision in that hotel would pass through his hands, through his signature, through his indispensable presence. He walked down the wide corridor, adorned with works of art that he himself had suggested to the chain on a past occasion. He felt part of the elite of that world, someone who dictated rules, numbers, investments. With each step, his ego inflated more, as if he were about to enter a stage where he would be applauded. He entered the air-conditioned room, convinced that he would find anxious executives, managers waiting for approval, and directors, bowing before his financial power. But the first sight threw him off balance. Seated at the main table, in the chair normally occupied only by the building's highest authority, was she, the same woman he had humiliated minutes before, the cleaning lady, the woman he had told to get out of the way, the person he had treated as invisible. Only now she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was impeccably dressed, with a serene and firm posture, conveying the kind of power that doesn't need to be announced. The silence that filled the room was almost physical, heavy, as if every molecule of the air were observing the shocked expression etched on his face. A manager opened the door for him to enter, and the respectful gesture was directed at her, not him. There, without a word, was the first revelation. She was the authority figure. She was the building's owner. The billionaire felt his body freeze. It wasn't just surprise, it was a kind of brutal exposure, as if all his arrogant attitudes had been placed under a light that revealed every shameful detail. The hidden truth was coming to the surface with force. The woman he had belittled was, in fact, the person to whom he needed to present his project, the person who had the power to approve or deny his investments. Every offensive comment he had previously uttered now returned like an uncomfortable echo, filling his mind with growing unease. It was the bitter feeling of realizing that his impulsive decisions had a profound impact, not only on people, but on the very image he was trying to maintain. She, in turn, remained exactly as before, calm, polite, professional. There was no pride, no mockery, no revenge. Just a firm presence of someone who knows who she is, of someone who doesn't need to raise her voice to occupy space. She asked him to sit down, and the simple gesture, accompanied by a confident look, had more power than any shout. He sat down, and for the first time, he felt he wasn't in control of the situation. The table seemed too big, the chair too uncomfortable, as if everything around him was arranged to put him exactly where he needed to be, confronted with his own actions. The meeting began with clarity and objectivity. She spoke about numbers, contracts, deadlines, investments. The fluency with which she explained each detail of the project revealed something he never would have imagined. She knew the business deeply. She knew every line of the document, every clause, every strategic implication. Her voice conveyed confidence, experience, mastery. There were no more uniforms to distract him, only the stark reality that he had underestimated someone far beyond the level of understanding he thought he possessed. It was a direct impact on his mindset, a silent invitation to transformation, not by imposition, but by confronting his own truth. And the more she spoke, the more he shrank inside. Shame burned his face. Discomfort pierced him like a mirror forcibly placed before his own failings. It was as if the entire universe had orchestrated that moment so that he could finally see his own actions unfiltered. An unexpected journey of humiliation and revelations, built not by her harshness, but by the firmness with which she stood. She didn't mention what happened in the lobby. She didn't need to. The weight of her own actions already did the job completely. The billionaire, accustomed to being flattered, didn't know how to react. His voice faltered on his first attempts to answer a question, and he realized he needed to take a deep breath before speaking. For the first time, it wasn't money that determined his demeanor, but the recognition that he needed to reconsider who he was becoming. It was as if that closed room were a laboratory of change, where every second pushed him toward a consciousness he had avoided for years. The transformation began there, silent, slow, inevitable. She continued to look at him, not with disdain, but with the serenity of someone who understands the importance of each fall in the process of growth, and that disarmed him even more. There was no direct punishment, no humiliation in return, only a mirror that showed the hidden truth he didn't want to see, that his arrogance would always be his own downfall. The owner paused briefly, observing his reaction, and it was at that moment that something changed within him. A profound, almost painful realization that he needed to reconsider his way of walking through the world. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't just an external upheaval. It was an encounter between power, dignity, and responsibility. Every word she spoke, every gesture she maintained, every boundary she delicately established created an atmosphere of learning that drew him to an inner place he didn't know existed. It was as if life was showing him that respect cannot be outsourced, that empathy is not optional, and that thoughtless decisions always come back sooner or later to exact their price. He began to see not only the owner, but the woman who had built that with effort, intelligence, and vision. The woman who deeply understood the inner workings of each sector, because she had already been through them all before arriving there. And as we perceive this turning point, it becomes impossible not to feel the impact of this moment. His awareness expanded, even though he tried to hide it. His gaze changed, his posture changed. It was the beginning of a gradual reconstruction that he would never have sought on his own. It wasn't about contracts, it was about character. It wasn't about business, it was about choices. He realized that this encounter, however uncomfortable, was exactly what he needed. It was a revelation that pierced the surface and plunged deep, touching parts of him that had been dormant for a long time. And the most interesting thing is that while all this was happening, she remained completely in control, guiding the conversation with firmness and gentleness at the same time, an authority born of competence, not imposition, a strength that doesn't need to be noisy to be felt. And he understood there, in an almost painful way, that there was much to learn from that woman he had tried to diminish without even imagining her in her true role. Something inside him began to rearrange itself, as if old structures were crumbling to make room for something more genuine. Comment below. This makes sense to me. When he finally managed to recover from that initial shock, he was no longer the man he had been minutes before. His arrogant posture gave way to an uncomfortable, almost childlike rigidity, like someone who suddenly loses all the certainties that had always supported him. He took a deep breath, tried to steady himself in the chair, but the gesture came out crooked, hesitant, as if his own spine no longer knew the right position to support that new weight. The weight of truth, the hidden truth he never imagined facing. And she, sitting in front of him, observed everything with that quiet and attentive gaze that did not humiliate, but revealed every detail of what was happening inside him, the conflict, the shame, the silent despair of someone who understands that they have crossed a border from which there is no return. It was impressive how she didn't need to raise her voice. The simple fact of her being there, with that solid calm, dismantled all the distorted mentality he carried. The atmosphere seemed to breathe differently, as if the air carried a new hierarchy, not based on money, position, or appearance, but on something infinitely deeper, character. And he realized, almost like an internal click, that throughout his journey of financial success, he had accumulated wealth, contracts, and power, but had lost the most human ability of all, to see the other person, to recognize dignity where arrogant eyes refused to look. She arranged a piece of paper on the table, not out of necessity, but to give him time to understand that this scene wasn't just a meeting. It was a turning point. It was the direct impact of the decisions he made without thinking, the habits he nurtured without realizing it, the behind-the-scenes aspects of his own story that he ignored, while believing the whole world was made to bow to his every step. And it's curious how sometimes the most profound transformation is born precisely at the moment when pride encounters a limit, a wall, an unexpected person who forces us to see what we never wanted to face. She then spoke, her voice steady, firm, yet still polite, a serenity that didn't diminish the weight of her words. On the contrary, it made each syllable even more powerful. She said that respect was essential, that no job made someone invisible, that character is revealed precisely when we believe no one is watching. She mentioned small actions he had taken hours before, actions that perhaps seemed insignificant to him, but which, to those who heard, to those who felt, were like open wounds. And while she spoke, he swallowed hard, unable to find space to justify anything. There was no justification. There was only an inevitable lesson happening right there, before the eyes of someone who never imagined needing to learn anything from a simple cleaning lady. But it is precisely in this irony that the great revelation lies. There is no such thing as a simple cleaning lady, simple employee, or a simple person. Every human being carries a story, a strength, a behind-the-scenes journey that no one sees. And it was this truth that finally broke down his defenses, because at that moment, it wasn't the building owner talking to a billionaire. It was two people, one who had always known how to see, the other who was learning to see for the first time. He lowered his eyes when he realized she was carefully reviewing the contract. Each note she made seemed a silent reminder that competence has no color, position, or appearance. His mindset, which had always fed on superiority, began to crumble. And as this happened, something unexpected arose within him. Genuine admiration. Awkward admiration, it's true, because it came mixed with regret, shame, and that discomfort that accompanies moments of true growth. But it was there, alive, pulsating. He began to see that respect is not a social prop. It's a reflection of who you truly are. She finished reviewing the document, looked at him, and paused briefly. A pause not meant to create tension, but to give space to what came next, the final lesson. Not a lesson of humiliation, but of humanity. And it was this humanity that completely dismantled him. She didn't yell, didn't point a finger, didn't return the contempt she received. On the contrary, she offered him the chance to act differently from then on. The chance to choose a new posture, a new awareness, a new way of existing in the world. And that generosity in that context hurt more than any scolding could hurt, because there was no way to leave that room and remain the same man. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happens within it from here on out is what truly transforms the story. It's not just the initial shock, it's not just the unexpected twist, it's what is born afterward, the intimate decision to truly change. It is at this moment that we begin to understand how small encounters can generate enormous revelations, capable of altering not only the course of a situation, but the very structure of someone from within. Because when the truth is placed before us, without anger, without violence, but with firmness and clarity, the impact is much greater. And that is what makes this story so powerful, the contrast between the ego that shatters and the dignity that remains intact. As he listened to her last sentence, something inside him finally gave way. It wasn't defeat, it was liberation. As if, for the first time, the billionaire had realized that his greatest asset had never been money, but rather the ability to recognize the value that exists in others. And when he looked up, his expression was different, less proud, more human. And this change, however small it seemed, was the beginning of everything. Comment below. This makes sense to me. It's curious. When a story ends like this, with so much truth exposed and so much humanity revealed, the feeling that remains isn't one of closure, but of continuity, as if something within us has been adjusted, repositioned, illuminated in a different way. And if you've stayed with me this far, it's because this message resonated with some part of you, perhaps a silent piece that had been seeking exactly this kind of reflection, this discreet but profound transformation. And that's why, before you continue, I want to ask you something in a very natural way, almost like a conversation after an important moment. If this content added to your understanding, if it truly made sense, if it touched on some point in your personal journey, please subscribe to the channel. Not just to grow numbers, but because this only exists when people like you continue walking with me. Your subscription shows that this type of narrative, reflection, and emotional impact has value, and that gives me the strength to continue bringing stories that awaken, disturb, heal, and make you think. And take this opportunity to leave a simple phrase in the comments, just so I know you made it to the end. Write, "I'm with you until the end." It's a beautiful way to seal this conversation and show me that this exchange made sense to you. I always read everything, and it's incredible to see how each person interprets these moments in their own way. Oh, and leave a like too, not as an automatic gesture, but as a way to keep alive this connection we've created here. These signals help YouTube deliver the video to those who also need to hear this type of message, and that makes all the difference. And since you're here, there's a video over there that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this reflection. Click and continue reading with me there.